Well, welcome to Chapter 9. And in Chapter 9, we're going to be looking at adjectives. And like the previous chapter, this is not a really long chapter. It's not a real hard one. And actually, a lot of adjectival grammar that I need to cover with you, you already know because of the article and what we've done with that. So you're not going to find a whole lot of new stuff in this chapter, so that's nice. All right, what's an adjective? Well, an adjective is a word that modifies another noun or pronoun. Adjectives can also modify other adjectives. So, for example, you have the tall teacher. Tall's an adjective. You have the short dog, and short's an adjective. You could have the dark red apple. And dark is an adjective modifying the adjective red. Red is an adjective modifying the noun apple. Okay, so the dark red apple. So that's what an adjective is. It's simply a word that's modifying another noun or pronoun, and adjectives can modify adjectives. There are three basic types of adjectives, and the first is called an attributive adjective. Now, this is by far the most common use of adjectives in both English and Greek. But the attributive adjective is very, very common. And all that an attributive adjective is doing is that it's giving an attribute of the head noun. The head noun is the noun or pronoun that the adjective is modifying. So if it's functioning as an attributive adjective, it's giving an attribute. It's giving a quality. It's telling you something about that head noun. So for example, if I were to say, he studied ancient Hebrew. Okay, ancient is your adjective. It's defining an attribute of the head noun Hebrew. It's not modern Hebrew, it's ancient Hebrew. Okay, so that's the most common uses of adjectives as an attributive adjective that's giving an attribute or a quality of the head noun. A second way in which adjectives are used, though, are as substantives, as the substantival use of an adjective. And this is simply when we have an adjective and it's functioning as if it were a noun. Okay, so the old movie, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, well, those are all adjectives. Good, bad, ugly are, in terms of their form, are actually adjectives. But they're functioning as a noun, so they are substantival adjectives. Or perhaps the old expression, and I guess it's not old, out with the old, in with the new. Okay, old and new are both adjectives, but they're functioning as if they were nouns. So adjectives can be both attributive and they can be substantival. There's a third category of adjectives called the predicate adjective. Now, some people prefer not to talk about a predicate adjective. They prefer to talk about an adjective in the predicate position. So check with your teacher, but the textbook presents this as a third kind of adjective. Remember what predicate means? A predicate means when you divide a sentence into its larger chunks, the predicate is the verb and what follows. So a predicate adjective is an adjective that's following the verb, but the important thing is that the verb is. It's the verb to be. So when you have an adjective that's following the verb to be, we call that a predicate adjective. And what you're going to find out in Greek is that we do the same thing, but the verb is doesn't have to be expressed in Greek, and it gets kind of interesting. But so, for example, if I said, she is young. She is the subject, is the stative verb, and so young is an adjective that's in the predicate position. It's following the verb is, and so we can call it a predicate adjective. All right. So that's enough English grammar for verbs. Let's get into Greek and take a look at this paradigm. Now, the first thing you may notice is there's 3 columns here. What's going on? Because with nouns are either masculine or they're feminine or they're neuter. But for a reason we're going to talk about in just a bit, adjectives have to occur in all 3 genders. And so we have a masculine form for an adjective, a feminine form for an adjective, and a neuter form for an adjective. But now that shouldn't be that new to you because you've already seen that, haven't you? Where have you seen this? We saw it with articles, right? Articles occur in all 3 genders. And so just like an article, adjectives likewise have to occur in all 3 genders. But if we take a look at these, the nominative singular is agathos, agathe, agathon. And the genitive singular is agathu, agathes, agathu. Dative is agatho, agathe, agatho. And the accusative singular is agathon, agathane, agathon. So you can get an idea of what's going on there. And by the way, when we talk about lexical forms of adjectives, the lexical form for a noun is the nominative singular, whatever gender it is. But the lexical form for an adjective, because it can occur in all three genders, is the masculine nominative singular. Okay? Well, let's take a look at the plural then. And in the plural, it's agathoi, agathai, agatha, agathon, 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 agathois, agathais, agathois, agathus, agathas, agatha. By the way, before we leave this screen, notice the 2-1-2. Okay, this means that agathos is a 2-1-2 adjective. It means there's three different forms for the three different genders. The masculine follows second declension, the feminine follows first declension, and the neuter follows second declension. That becomes especially important in just a little bit. Okay, that's it for the forms of an adjective. Let's talk about the functions of the Greek adjective. And obviously, their functions are going to be a lot like the English adjective and how it functions. Otherwise, I wouldn't have covered it. All right, what are the functions of a Greek adjective? Well, first of all, most Greek adjectives are attributive. Most Greek adjectives are attributing something of the head noun. Or they're describing, limiting, clarifying something of the head noun. Now, when an adjective is functioning this way, when an adjective is giving an attribute of the head noun, what do you think determines its case number and gender? Rather than just having something else to memorize, just use your common sense, because you know the answer to this. When an adjective is functioning as an attributive adjective, when it's telling you something about the head noun, what determines the case number and gender of that adjective? Well, what determines the case number and gender of the article when it modifies a noun? Well, it agrees, doesn't it? The article agrees with the noun it modifies in case number and gender. And in the same way with adjectives, an adjective functioning as an attributive adjective is going to agree with the noun it modifies in case, number, and gender. Straightforward, right? Kind of common sense. So if you came across like ha agathos logos, you look at logos, and it's a nominative singular masculine, and so the article ha and the adjective agathos likewise have to be a nominative singular masculine. So that's real straightforward for attributive adjectives. I should say that provides a nice double check, by the way. If you're reading along and you see an adjective and you think it goes with a noun, you can kind of stop for a second and go, wait a minute. If this adjective is modifying this noun, then it's going to have the same case number and gender. Oh, it does. Yeah, they go together. So good double check. So adjectives can function as an attributive. Secondly, Greek adjectives can also function substantively. They can function as if they are nouns. And so what do you think would determine the case of an adjective that's functioning as a noun? Just think about it. If an adjective is functioning as if it's a noun, what determines its case? Well, just like the noun, the case of the adjective is going to be determined by its function in the sentence. So, for example, if you're using agathos and it's functioning as a substantival adjective and it's functioning as a subject, it's going to be in the nominative case, right? But if agathos is functioning as a noun and it's the direct object, it's going to be in the accusative case, right? So when an adjective is used substantively, its case is determined by its function in the sentence. Now, how are you going to determine the gender and number of an adjective used substantively? Again, it's not something to learn. You just got to think through what would make sense. If you were going to say good and you had to determine its gender and number, what would determine it for you? Well, it would be whatever it's standing for, right? It'd be what it's kind of like it's a pronoun. It's whatever it's standing for. It's not a pronoun, but If a pronoun refers back to me, you're going to say he, not she. Okay, so if you have agathos and it's referring to a single male, you're going to use the masculine singular, aren't you? And you can say agathos. But let's say you came across and you saw agathe, feminine. What do you do with it? Well, it's referring back to a single entity, which is female. And so you would understand why its gender is feminine, because it's going back to something that is feminine, that is female. So when it comes to, we're going to come back to this in just a bit, but that's all I need to say for right now. But so when it comes to adjectives being functioning substantively, as you would expect, their case is determined by function. Their gender and number are determined by what it's referring back to. Okay? All right. And I should say, too, what will happen is when adjectives are used substantively, you may find that you have to add in words. For example, to go back to the illustration of agathe, if you saw agathe and just translate it good, the fact that agathe is feminine might not come through in the simple translation of good. So you may need to see, depending upon the context, you may need to say something like the good woman or whatever fits the context. So when adjectives are functioning substantively, you can be a little freer at translating. You may have to add in extra words. The third situation is, third function, is when adjectives are functioning as a predicate adjective or functioning in the predicate position. And in Greek, the important thing here is that sometimes a me is going to be expressed. At other times, a me is not going to be expressed. There's not going to be any a me. And you're going to see an adjective, and for a reason we're going to talk about in a second, you'll realize that it's in the predicate, even though a me is not expressed. And so, again, you have to be careful in your translation. For example, let's say you came across and you saw anthropos agathos. Well, you would go, the man good. Oh, that's kind of weird. What do I do with that? Well, in this particular case, agathos is functioning as a predicate adjective. It's in the predicate position. And so you're going to be able to supply is. The man is good. So those are the three functions of adjectives, as an attributive and as a substantival and in the predicate. Okay? All right. The key then is recognition. How do you recognize whether the adjective is functioning as an attributive, substantival, or a predicate adjective? And the whole key here is the article. It's one of those situations I said earlier that the article is your friend. It really is your friend. It's going to help you make this decision as to whether the adjective is attributive, substantival, or predicate. And the guidelines I'm going to give you are precisely that, guidelines. There's some flexibility in Greek about this, but these are the general truths, okay? All right. I need to make sure you know two words, and they are articular and anarthrous. If I say that a construction is articular, it means that the article, ha, is present. If I say that a construction is anarthrous, it means that the article is not present, okay? So those are two important grammatical terms. I can't remember if I've used them yet in the grammar or not, so there. Let's take that first situation, the articular situation. Let's say you're looking at an adjective and the article is present. Okay, that's your clue. And by present, I mean the article is immediately, not somewhere else in the sentence, but the article is immediately before the adjective. Okay, that's an articular adjective. Well, let's look at these. One option could be that the article is indicating that the following adjective is an attributive. And so, for example, if you were reading along and you saw ha agathos anthropos, you would translate it the good man. Okay, the article right in front of agathos is telling you that agathos is in the attributive position and it's modifying the noun. Now, there actually are basically two positions for adjectives. The first attribute, I should say, for the attributive adjective. The first attributive position is this: article adjective noun, or I'd really prefer you to learn it as article modifier noun. What we're going to find later on is that there's other things that can modify nouns. So just get into your head. The first attributive position is article modifier noun. Ha, agathos, anthropos, the good man. Okay? Well, there is a second attributive position, and it is article noun, article modifier. Okay? So if you were reading and you came across ha, anthropos, ha, agathos, the man, the good, that second article actually has no translatable meaning. This is one of the problems that people have when they look at interlinears and they see articles that aren't translated. They go, oh, you should translate all the words. Well, not all words have meaning that can be translated. In this second attributive position, article noun, article modifier, the second article has a purely grammatical function, and it's simply telling you that the following modifier, the following adjective, is in the attributive position and modifies the preceding word. So, ha, anthropos, ha, agathos, the man that good, would be translated the good man. Now, there are nuances of difference between the first and second attributive positions, not something that we need to deal with right now. Okay, but the key is the article immediately in front of the adjective? And if it is, then the adjective is probably in an attributive position, and you're going to translate it as a regular adjective. Okay. Now let's look at another scenario. We're still under the general category of articular constructions. Let's say you came along and you saw ha agathos. You translated the good. Go, wait a minute, where's the noun? You're looking all over for this noun. Where's the noun? Well, that's your clue. The clue is that if you have an articular adjective, and the adjective doesn't always have to be articular, but it often is. If you find an articular adjective with no noun to modify, you probably best bet is that the adjective is functioning as a noun. It's functioning as a substantive. So if you just saw agathos, you would end up translating it the good, and you'd go on with your sentence. The good is. And again, you look at that and you go, is that English or is that not? And if it's not good English, you may need to add in a word. And that's generally okay with most teachers. Okay, there is a third scenario under the articular heading, and that has to do with predicate adjectives. If you're reading along and you find an article with a noun, and then you find an adjective that's anarthrous, there's a pretty good chance that the adjective is a predicate adjective. So for example, if you saw ha, anthropos, agathos, there is an article with the noun. That's why this is under the articular heading. There is an article with the noun, but the adjective itself is anarthrous. A pretty good chance that that's a predicate adjective, and you're going to have to supply the verb is. The man is good. So those are the three scenarios in which you're going to have adjectives with an article somewhere, and so we call those the articular uses. Now there is a whole nother use of the adjective called the anarthrous use. And so this is the situation where there's no article anywhere. Let's say you were reading along. I mean, when I say nowhere, I mean not with the noun, not with the adjective. If you were reading along and you saw anthropos agathos, you go, what do I do with this? Well, if agathos is telling you something about anthropos, you would translate it something like a good man. And in these situations, try not to use the word the, if possible. If you have to use something, use a, all right? So if you saw anthropos agathos, you would say a good man. Or the agathos could be in a predicate position, and it's a man is good. And all you do is look at the context and say what works, what fits here, what makes best sense here, and then go with that translation. Okay? So we have the articular use for attributives, substantives, and sometimes with adjectives in the predicate when the subject has the article. And then we have anarthrous uses where there's not a noun, there's not an article with the noun or the adjective, and you just have to go with context and see what makes best sense. Okay? Let me cover just a few odds and ends now relative to adjectives and modifiers. And the reason I'm doing this is that these are coming up in the workbook. So I need to explain them now for you. Odds and end number 1. You're going to occasionally come across a construction where you have the article followed by a prepositional phrase. And it's going to feel weird for you. Go, what's the article doing in front of the prepositional phrase? And generally what you have in these situations is article, noun, article, modifier. But in this case, the modifier is not the adjective, it's a prepositional phrase. And what you're going to have to do is to look at it and understand that that article in front of the prepositional phrase has a purely grammatical function. It's telling you that the following prepositional phrase is modifying the preceding head noun. And then in translation, you're going to have to be a little flexible with these because we don't have this construction in English. So you see what's going on in Greek and you go, okay, how do I say the same thing in English? And you do your translation, all right? The example we have in the textbook is tous paides, tous en Bethlehem. Okay, word for word, that means the children, the in Bethlehem. Now, how on earth are you going to translate that? Well, that second tous is simply telling you that the following prepositional phrase is modifying paides, the children, the in Bethlehem. Now, how do we say that in English? Well, we might say the children in Bethlehem, or we might say the children who are in Bethlehem. That's an English style thing. And again, so you have to be flexible in translating these. But the point is that that second tous, the one right before the prepositional phrase, is simply telling you that that prepositional phrase is modifying the preceding noun. Okay, so that's important. The other time you can get an article followed by a prepositional phrase is the article is indicating that the prepositional phrase is functioning as a substantive. Okay, so this gets really flexible in translation. The exercise in the textbook is this verse, and it means, word for word, they spoke the word of God, pasin, to all, tois, the, inte oikia, in the house. Okay, they spoke the word of the Lord to all, the in the house. How do we say that in English? Well, it's to all who are in the house, or we say to all those in the house, something like that. Now check with your teacher about how free he or she wants you to be in handling these situations. But you're going to have to be free. You can't say to all the in the house. That's not English, right? Okay, so that's the first odds and end. What happens when you have an article in front of the prepositional phrase? All right? Okay, good. Second odds and end has to do with what are called tu-tu adjectives. When I showed you the agathos paradigm before, I said this is a 2-1-2. In other words, there's 3 distinct forms for masculine, feminine, and neuter. And in the case of agathos, the masculine follows second declension, the feminine follows first, and the neuter follows second. Okay. We're going to meet another kind of adjective in this chapter, and it's aionios. And when you look at it in the lexicon, it's going to say aionios on. You go, wait a minute, where's the third form? Well, this is a tu-tu adjective. And what that means is that first form is second declension and is used for both masculine and feminine words. And then the second form, the on, is also second declension, but it's used with neuter words. Okay, so tu-tu doesn't distinguish in form between masculine and feminine. Third odd and end has to do with neuter plural subjects. And here's the basic rule. If you have a neuter plural subject, the verb can be singular. Now, it's not always singular. But if you have a neuter plural subject, the verb can be singular. And what's going on when this happens is that by using the singular verb, the author is telling you that he's thinking of this neuter plural subject as a single entity. And so if you saw a flock of geese and you wanted to, if this were all Greek, and you wanted to refer to it, you want to draw attention to the fact there were 23 geese in it, but you wanted to talk about the flock as a whole. If that were a neuter plural subject, you would say is. All right. Now, the trick here is that, remember, we're talking about grammatical gender. We're not talking about natural gender. In other words, you can have words that are grammatically neuter, and we don't really think of them as neuter, but because they're grammatically neuter, you can have this singular verb. Here's a good example of one. In 1 John 4:1, John says, test the spirits and see if they are from God. Okay, the Greek form, if you already memorized Amy, the Greek form translated they are is estin, isn't it? Well, estin is singular. Well, why do we do what they are? Well, spirits, pneuma, is a neuter word. It's referring to the message and the false preachers, but it's using the word pneuma. Pneuma is neuter. In this case, it's neuter plural. And John is thinking about all of these false prophets, these antichrists, together. And so he uses the singular verb, but we can't say test the spirits and see if they is. We have to say they are. Well, however you want to explain it. It's we have to switch into the plural in English. But that's okay. In Greek, neuter plural subjects can take singular verbs if the author wants. All right. Well, that's it for adjectives. Let's go ahead and take a look at our summary. We learned that adjectives are words that modify nouns or pronouns and can modify other adjectives as well. We saw that when an adjective is articular, and there's a word for it to modify, it's functioning as an attributive adjective. And in the case of an attributive, case number and gender is determined by the noun that it modifies. If you have an articular adjective but no noun to modify, then that adjective is functioning substantively. Case is determined by function, gender and number determined by what it's referring to. If you have an articular noun and an anarthrous adjective, the adjective is probably in the predicate and you're going to have to supply the verb to be. And if there's no article anywhere, then let context be your guide. Try not to use the in your translation, but you're going to have to determine what fits. Is the adjective predicate or attributive? We also saw how you can have an article plus prepositional construction, and that prepositional phrase could be modifying a noun or it could be functioning as a substantive. We saw that adjectives have to agree with their nouns they modify in case, number, and gender. And for some adjective, that means they're going to have 3 different forms. But there are some adjectives that are 2-2, where the same Greek form is used, whether it's masculine or feminine. And finally, we saw that a singular verb can be used with a neuter plural subject. So how are you doing? Are you in the fog? Yeah, well, we're getting further into the book. There's more and more that we have to learn, more that we have to retain. And the interesting thing about language is it's not like you can learn something and then forget it. You've got to keep all this stuff in your head. And if you're looking at this chapter and saying, I'm just blown away, I can't do this. Again, do what I encouraged you to do earlier, march back. How are prepositions? They're making a little sense. How the case of its object is going to vary depending upon what preposition it is. If that's a little foggy, how are you doing with datives and genitives? I mean, if you go back to chapter 6 and 7 at this point, it should be just an absolute piece of cake. Not a problem at all. If the chapter 8 is a little foggy, chapter 9 is foggier still, that's okay. Just keep moving through it. The fog will move with you. But if you look back and you say, I still don't know what a case is, and I can't remember what the dative is, you're in trouble. Not to be an alarmist, but you are in trouble. And so if you're having trouble 2 chapters back, go to your teacher. If you have a TA, if you have friends in the class, go back and get some help. Make sure you keep using my website at technia.com. There's just gobs of stuff I've put up there to help you, especially when there's no one else around to help you. But this is just the nature of the fog. If the fog goes back to chapters 6 and 7, you're in trouble. If its prepositions are a little frustrating because maybe you can't remember them, that's okay. It just takes time for this stuff to sink in for most people. So just keep moving through the fog, okay? All right. Well, let's go to vocabulary. Agathos, agathe, agathon. Good, useful. Agapetos, agapete, agapeton. Beloved. Ionios, ionion. Eternal. Alelon, one another. Apokrythe, he, she, it answered. Doulos, doulou, ha. Slave, servant. Eon, if, when. Emas, eme, eman. My, mine. Entole, entoles, hey. Commandment. Kathos, as, even as. Kakas, kake, kakan. Bad, evil. Mu, my, also pronounced emu. Nekros, nekra, nekron. As an adjective, dead. As a noun, dead body, corpse. Pistos, piste, piston. Faithful, believing. Poneros, ponera, poneron. Evil, bad. Protos, prote, proton. First, earlier. Tritos, trite, triton. Third.